That's one thing I was going to make sure you all were aware of. The meeting's being recorded, so. Just a couple housekeeping things. Please mute your phones and computers. Put your phones on silent, please, especially if you're attending remotely. So for those on the phone and on the video conferencing, please make sure if you're on your computer that your computer's muted as well as your phone. The bathroom is through that door, right at the end of the room there. And also, this workshop is eligible for credits under the Certified Public Official Program through the UNR's Extended Studies Program. So if anyone's a part of that program, and if you would like to receive credit for this workshop, please either contact Amanda if you're participating remotely, or fill out a form. The forms are right on the table there. And as you heard the computer lady voice say, this workshop is being recorded. So be on your best behavior.
What she means is don't pick your nose.
What's being recorded is the video as well as audio. So we will, after we're done today, we'll post the link onto our website as well as the PowerPoints, so that if you have colleagues or fellow commissioners who weren't able to make it, they can still be here by watching online and viewing the materials online. So we'll have that resource up indefinitely. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for coming. Welcome to NACO, the NACO office. I'm Dagny Stapleton, the Executive Director of NACO. And I just want to acknowledge that in our audience today, both remotely and here in person, we actually have 10 of Nevada's 17 counties represented. So we look like a small group, but we're actually impacting the majority of the state, both urban and rural participants today. So thank you for your engagement, and we have a great discussion planned for you today. I want to first just recognize NACO's Committee of the Emeritus. They are the entity sponsoring this workshop. By sponsoring, meaning helping us set it up and providing input. The Committee of the Emeritus is a group of former county commissioners who advise and help the NACO board. The committee was formed with the goal of preserving the institutional knowledge and expertise of commissioners who, due to term limits or other factors, are no longer in office, but who possess invaluable knowledge about county government in Nevada. So this workshop series is put together by that group. This is the fourth and final workshop of the 2017-2018 Emeritus Series. The first three workshops included one on understanding Medicaid, which I know that everyone did after an hour and a half. If anyone works with Medicaid, they understand that. There's one on how the county budget process works, which is also very informative. Our most recent was on how a bill becomes a law in the Nevada legislature, and a little bit about that process. And so the recordings also for all of those are also on our website if you'd like to watch and catch up on any of that information. So today's workshop is the final workshop in the Emeritus Series. It's focused on natural resources and public lands issues, specifically how and why to write a county public lands plan. We'll talk about what a county natural resources and public lands plan is, how they are useful, and hear tips about what should be included in those plans. So I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. We're going to have each of them do a presentation, and then we will have 20 to 30 minutes at least at the end for questions and discussion. So unless it's urgent, hold your questions till the end and we'll be able to have a discussion and answer your questions then. So first joining us today, we have Kimberly Jenkins. She's a Principal Environmental Specialist in the Clark County Desert Conservation Program down in Clark County, Southern Nevada. We want to thank Kim for traveling all the way up from Clark County to present to us today. We really appreciate it. Kim has worked for Clark County for 4 years. She oversees the implementation of Clark County's Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan. For those of you who do not know, that's their tortoise plan. It's a big deal down there, how they mitigate and manage for that. So that's a big job. Kim has more than 17 years experience working with endangered species issues. And Kim is going to provide us with an urban perspective about the importance of having a county natural resources plan in place. Our next panelist is Jake Tibbetts. Jake is the Natural Resources Manager for Eureka County. Jake is a biologist and rangeland scientist, and he received his master's and his undergraduate from Idaho State. He is involved in a number of natural resources and public lands issues across the state. Many of you probably know him from his involvement in those. He's the current chairman of the Nevada State Land Use Planning Advisory Council, commissioner on the Nevada State Conservation Commission. He's the Nevada delegate on the Council for Agricultural Research, Extension, and Teaching. And Jake will provide us with a rural perspective on the importance of county plans. Next on our panel is Sheva Gabor. She is the state liaison for the U.S. Forest Service here in Nevada, representing the Intermountain Region office. She's held that position since 2015. Prior to that, she served as a legislative affairs officer for the Forest Service at Lake Tahoe. And then from 1997 to 2007, Sheva worked for the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, doing outreach and as the communications director. She actually started her career as a reporter and editor covering Congress and the federal agencies. And she's going to give us a federal perspective on the importance of county plans. And then finally, Brianne Emery, a natural resources planner from Utah's Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office, is joining us today. Brianne has a master's degree in environmental communication and planning and a master's certificate in urban planning. She has used these working as a NEPA specialist and environmental planner for the past decade. She started her career with the BLM and also has worked for the Forest Service. Is that correct?
Briefly in college.
Okay. In her current capacity, she works on policy issues with Utah's 29 counties and its many natural resources agencies. Most recently, she helped with the completion of 29 unique Utah County resource management plans and a statewide resource management plan. Again, Brianne traveled from Utah to join us today. And we're very appreciative of her willingness to come to Nevada and share her expertise. Unlike Nevada, Utah has a state office dedicated to working on public lands issues, and this office has provided, from what we know, extensive support to counties in writing their natural resources and public lands plan. In Nevada, we don't exactly have a comparable state entity. Well, I guess we sort of do, and one of their only overworked and awesome staff members is here today. It can't Bill, so I want to recognize. And also, many of our counties do not have up-to-date natural resources and public lands plans, which is part of the reason we're here today. So we're very eager to hear your perspective and expertise today. Again, as I said, at the end of the presentations, we'll have ample time for panel discussion and questions. And before I turn the discussion over to our panelists, I want to provide just a brief introduction on this topic. So I know a lot of you in the room are planners, but for those who are not and who have a little less background on this issue, what is a county natural resources and public lands plan? Short answer, this is a part of your county's master plan. According to Chapter 278 of the Nevada Revised Statutes, your county should work through your planning commission to create your master plan. That section of Nevada law also outlines the different elements that may be contained in your master plan, including a conservation element, which can be the natural resources piece of your master plan. Conservation element is defined as a plan for conservation, development, and utilization of natural resources. That section of Nevada law also has some requirements on what that element should include. Nevada law also defines a land use element of a county's master plan, which should include requirements about community design, subdivision, and inventory of lands in your county, compatibility of military installations, and a provision concerning the acquisition and use of federal land, as well as a planner statement of policy prepared in coordination with the State Land Use Planning Agency. The State Land Use Planning Agency is part of what, it's basically him. And Jake will talk about that state piece of your master plan and the connection there later. So basically, bottom line, there are some parameters in Nevada law enabling counties to produce a portion of their master plan to address both natural resources and public land. Additionally, Nevada law enables counties to prepare and adopt additional pieces of their master plan as needed, as long as they relate to the physical development of the county. So with that basic framework, I will turn it over to our first panelist. There's actually one more brief thing that I want to note, and you all probably know this, is that there is also a legal process for any amendments to your master plan, including required hearings and community input. So there's those type of parameters too around producing any natural resources and public lands plan that is a part of your master plan. Okay, Kim, take it away.
Okay. Hi. So she mentioned I'm with Clark County, and I oversee the multiple species habitat conservation plan there. So I'll preface by just saying that I'm not a planner. I'm actually a biologist by background, but I do have a fair bit of experience working with the local federal land management agencies to protect natural resources in southern Nevada. And so I'm just going to give a brief kind of overview on the benefits and the purpose for these plans. There are many competing interests when it comes to deciding how best to make use of the community's natural resources, because we use our resources in a variety of ways to satisfy both our needs and wants. A natural resources and public lands management plan can help a community avoid degradation and destruction of its resources, help it to address water use issues, and to improve conditions of the resources. So what are these two plans? A natural resources management plan would help landowners, communities, and planners work together to identify resources and accomplish multiple objectives that are best for the land, water, and people. This plan can be a vision for the future ecological health of an area. In essence, the plan should be a roadmap that guides you from where you are to where you want to be. It's a specific statement of objectives that you have for the land. A public lands management plan establishes policies to ensure the management of public lands are consistent with local land use planning goals. This plan aids in coordinating county interests with those of federal agencies to ensure the continued compatible land uses, public access to public lands, and maintenance of resource values in the community. These plans combine protection of environmental resources with community goals which may include economic development, improved government efficiency, enhanced quality of life. Without these types of planning frameworks, decisions may be made based on short-term conditions, but with long-term undesirable consequences. The long-term stewardship of natural resources is vital to the community's quality of life, economic prosperity, and resiliency. So why do we talk about these two plans together? Because Nevada presents, I think I'm off by a slide, I'm sorry. Because Nevada presents unique challenges, and I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see. Unique challenges. Over 80% of the land in Nevada is managed by a federal agency. And in Clark County, that figure is closer to 90%. Many residential centers are landlocked or completely surrounded by federal lands, and there are many competing views within our communities on how to best manage our natural resource and public lands. Thus, planning for wildlife conservation, growth and development, and resource management require a vision, and it requires cooperation and coordination with federal agencies.
There's another figure right behind you that you might be able to see better.
Thank you. So, developing these planning documents helps communities achieve sound use and management of soil, water, plant, and animal resources to prevent degradation, assure sustained use and productivity, and comply with regulatory requirements while also considering economic and social needs. These plans also send a clear message to what the community values and wishes to preserve, and if well crafted, can help reduce surprises to developers, local officials, and residents. So the Bureau of Land Management, I think we're all pretty familiar with them probably, is the single largest land manager in the state, responsible for administering approximately 63% of the land in Nevada. The Federal Lands Policy Management Act is BLM's governing legislation, and it mandates that the BLM keep apprised of local land use plans and, to the extent practical, to manage their lands under their administration in a manner that is consistent with those local land use plans and policies. But we have to communicate what those local land use plans and policies are before BLM can be bothered to be consistent with them. BLM staff change frequently and often come from other regions in the country that may be faced with very different challenges, and they don't understand and know Nevada communities like those of us that have lived here for a long time. This is why it's important that a community clearly communicate its vision and goals in their land use planning documents. This is the single most effective way of ensuring that federal agencies tasked with managing our lands will do so in a manner that is consistent with the community's desires and needs. So in conclusion, natural resources management and public lands plans are very important tools in the struggle to shape communities in a manner that best serves all of our residents while preserving our way of life and our economic opportunities. These plans can help a community achieve sound use and management of its natural resources, and they help to assure sustained use and productivity of the lands, and they aid in complying with regulatory requirements while considering economic and social needs. These planning documents are key to communicating and realizing the vision and goals that a community has to its citizens and to those agencies that are tasked with stewardship of the land. Thank you.
All right. My turn?
Your turn, Jane.
Okay. I don't have a PowerPoint. This is my PowerPoint. This is my Palm Pilot. So, Eureka County, I work for Eureka County. We're the second to last smallest in the state. We have 2,000 people total in our entire county. But our economy in Eureka County is 99% driven by, it's a natural resources economy, like many of the, or most of the, at least the rural counties and most of Nevada. So very similar to the state as a whole, we're over 80% federally managed land, a small amount of private land, and we have, again, a lot of mostly reliant on our agricultural base and then mining. Those are our two main industries that sustain us. So with that kind of highlights my perspective from a rural county of why it's important to be involved in natural resource management planning as well as public lands policy development and public lands planning, because virtually everything that I do and that our county relies on touches one of those aspects, and many of you would be the same way. Dwight Eisenhower, he had a statement or a quote that he often said. He said it a few different ways. And, he had the perspective of not only being president of the U.S., but also as a commander in the military. And his statement was that plans are meaningless, but planning is everything. And then he went on to talk about what that meant. And I really, as I thought about that statement and read some of his talks and things when he used that statement, I think it's very true that it's not the documents you get when you're done at the end of the day. It's the process and the relationship building and the issues that you thought about and the thoughtfulness and the deliberation and all those things. If you enter into a planning process, it forces you to think about the things that are important for your community. So the plan that comes out of that may be that, memorializing what you did, but it's everything you did up until that point and in the implementation of the plan. It's the process of planning that's so important, because that's really where the rubber hits the road. So the heart of public land planning, in my opinion, is effective working relationships. And by that I don't mean everybody always agreeing on every point. There's often called the 80-20 rule, where we may all come together. There may be 20% we just can't always agree on, but 80% of the issues and items we can, with our federal land management partners, even our state agencies, we can come together on. It may be even higher than that on certain times, but it's kind of that 80-20 rule. But at the heart of that is, and Kimberly used the term quite a bit, is coordinating. And I know there's been this term coordination that's been kicked around, and some use it in various aspects, but I really believe in that term. So if you look at the definition of that, coordination, the definition in the dictionary is on the same level equal in importance, equal in rank, where the antonym of coordination is subordination, where somebody's a subordinate. So coordination, when you read FLPMA, the Federal Land Policy Management Act, the National Forest Management Act, various other organic acts, a lot of the regulations that implement these federal acts, they use that term coordination quite often. And I think that was Congress's intent, that we coordinate together with our federal agencies to come to plans that we and management that we can all live with. So the terms communication and collaboration and consultation, those are all important things. They all fit under that umbrella of coordination, but they are not always coordination. Just communicating and talking and collaboration, it can fit within there, but I really strongly believe that coordination is the key to put all this together. So there's basically 3 prongs to this issue that I've seen are very important. The first step is to know what, and Kimberly touched on that too, what do you want as a community? So probably everybody here, does anybody not have a public lands policy plan or a natural resource plan?
Can I tell you we're in the process of re-upping it?
Did you develop one in the
In the 80s, Skip wrote one
from SB 40? Okay, from SB. Right. Okay. So with that, you may have some policy statements and things based on a Nevada legislative bill in the 80s. But I think most of us have something on the shelf. And so planning isn't a static process. It's not where you develop something and put it on the shelf. It's continually looking at that. I can tell you in our county, I just passed my 10-year anniversary with Eureka County. And we're at the point now we're reopening our natural resource and public lands plan and going to dig into it and update it again. It's not something you do once. It's ours in Eureka County we've opened it and done substantial changes 3 times since 2000. So it's been a big formal process at least 3 times. But that helps understand the needs of your community, what your citizens want. You can have workshops and hearings and all those types of things. And that's an evolving process. As things change, often the needs and the wants of the community change. So it's finding out what you want and then moving forward. You have to be prepared to advocate for what you want. And again, it requires development or expansion of your currently related plans and policies, or maybe even formalizing new plans. So Dagny led out with some of the from NRS 278, which is the planning statutes, and she mentioned SCIP and SLUPA, which is the State Land Use Planning Agency. I have a packet that I'm going to leave with everybody that's it's 20 pages. I apologize, and I did it, so you're gonna have to wear your reading glasses or magnifying glass to read it because I shrunk it down. But there's a perspective on coordination from Eureka County on here. We have a short time today, so it has direct kind of cut and paste from the Federal Land Management Policy Act, from NEPA. It has various state statutes, so it has various statutes from NRS 278 that you can look at. So this may be useful when you're going back. But one of the things it includes in here is some statements from NRS 321, which is the statute that basically guides what SCIP does in the State Land Use Planning Agency, and talks about this. So when we talk about natural resource planning or even public land management or public land policy plans or management plans, being from a county perspective or a planning commission within a county, we may often put the blinders on and think, well, this is a county process. Planning is a county process. NRS 278 talks about plans through a planning commission, and it goes to the county commission for approval and all that type of stuff. But keep in mind that there's other local governments as well as state agencies and others that also have natural resource planning authority and mandates, and keep that in mind. So after you've determined what you want to do and want to move forward, you need to develop that plan. I think one of the very important things, in my opinion, is you don't develop a plan in a vacuum without the federal agencies being able to participate in that process if they wish to. I think Sheva may talk on this, but in the Forest Service new planning rule that was put in place in 2012, they have a statement right in there that the Forest Service will, as appropriate, work in state and local planning issues. So they're kind of mandated themselves to be at the table. And so it kind of helps move things along. But after you get that plan in place, and Kimberly mentioned this too, you can't rely on the mandates that the federal agencies have to coordinate with you or to find consistency with your plan if you don't inform them of it and you don't keep those communications open. So you have to inform them of your plans and constantly do that. It is within counties, within agencies, it can tend to be somewhat of a revolving door and new people all the time. So there may be folks that are new or that don't know those obligations or maybe fresh in the agency or maybe fresh at the county, and continuing to have that dialogue so everybody can know what their mandates are. But again, it comes down to relationships and working relationships. What we do, our county commission passed an ordinance, and it mandates that the county commission every year provide written notice to all the federal agencies at their first formal meeting in January. So they provide a letter every year in January to the federal agencies and many of the state agencies as well, again, reminding them, hey, we have our plans and policies, we mandate that coordination, we want to work with you and have a strong working relationship. It kind of keeps that everybody on the same page. And then the third point, after you have informed those agencies and you continue to work with them, is, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but fight for consistency. This isn't a silver bullet. It's not you just pass a plan or you pass policy and then you can't just say federal agencies, you need to be consistent. You have to, when I mean fight, I do mean dialogue and I mean work together. And I call it a healthy, it's not a conflict, but a healthy, I can't even think of the right term. Yeah, right now, having that tension, the healthy tension, that helps for a good working relationship. And having a healthy tension is important and that open door and that conversation. But really, any success we've seen in Eureka County is not done through letter writing campaigns. It's done through personal relationships, even on issues you don't agree with, and having that way to talk to people and having a basis of a plan to always go back to. You have to know what's required on yourselves, and then you have to also know what's required of your partners so everybody can be held accountable on that. There's various ways to do that. I think Chev will get into that. Operating agency processes in NEPA. There's just general coordination through FLIPMA. There's a lot of different avenues you can do to get there. One of the things that we advocate is, and this is kind of for Sheva and BLM as well, is we've advocated for many years from the Eureka County is that the federal agencies enter into coordination MOUs with all the counties. It very clearly describes, maybe when issues arise, how you're going to work together. It outlines formal quarterly or every 2-month meetings, puts everybody on the same page. So when a new district ranger or a new Sheva or a new forest supervisor or a new BLM district manager, that there's a formal document in place that can continue to keep that process going over and over and over again. And having those formalities in place helps when you get new county commissioners, a new planning commission, a new staff person. If you have a formal protocol in place, everybody always knows what's going to happen. At certain months you're going to meet together when an issue of concern. There's a process that kicks in to work out those issues. And then build or use the network of help that's already available. An old saying, many hands make light work. And in this document I'll leave with all of you, that's where agencies like SLUPA, the State Land Use Planning Agency, there's SLUPAC, which is under SLUPA, which is the State Land Use Planning Advisory Council. If you read in here their obligations and duties, our job is SLUPAC. Many members of SLUPAC are here. And SLUPAC is the only board or commission that has a person that's appointed by the governor from every county in the state. So that, and then NACO has an ex officio role on there as well. And that, if you read when I again provide this to you, and that's in NRS 321, look at SLUPA and SLUPAC as a help, as a guide to help develop your plans, resource for some ideas, kind of vet things and see if there's things other counties. Keep that avenue of communication open, because we're all better by working together and trying to have consistency amongst all of ourselves as well. Also note that the state statute under SLUPA and SLUPAC has provisions for when there's two adjacent municipalities, like two counties, and their plans are inconsistent with each other, and you come to some of those border issues, or even when you're with federal agency where they may have a district that covers multiple counties. Well, there is a process under state law to help resolve inconsistencies even amongst counties when there's issues, and that's to be submitted back to the executive committee of SLUPAC. Again, a formal process to help get some of those things resolved. Be at the table. Don't accept a subordinate position. So I did promise that I know maybe I'm running along. I'm sorry for that. But I do want to touch on a couple things. Earlier when I mentioned there's others, there are many of these resources and other local entities and even state entities that have many of the same mandates for planning that counties, planning commissions do. One of those I'll point out is the conservation districts, and I am actively involved in the conservation districts, and that's why I think Jerry is as well. Just so everybody's aware, every county in this state, the counties are mandated to appoint a person on each conservation district. So one of the supervisors on every district is a county appointed person. So there's a direct role there. It's also in the packet, but the legislature has a couple declarations in NRS 548 that mandates the conservation districts are the primary authority for planning and development of natural resources. So you kind of have these dueling things, and I'd say rather than seeing these as separation of powers or whatever, find it as a coordinated way to come together. And I'm just going to put a plug in for a process that many of the conservation districts are moving forward on now in support with many of our federal partners, and it's called a resource needs assessment process. And this resource needs assessment process is being completed. It's a local grassroots process to bring all the local stakeholders and interests together to develop what are the local resource needs that need to be addressed. And that becomes the foundation for then building management plans and action plans from that. So I just want to put a plug in to please seek out your local conservation district and find them and use them as a big partner moving forward. I'll also note that on conservation districts, the legislature has also made a legislative declaration that the conservation districts have special expertise to be cooperating agencies, and they also have those general authorities for just general coordination under FLIPMA or any other federal laws, and that's specifically in the state law. The next thing, one of the last things that let's speak about here is the clearinghouse. And Skip, of many of the hats that he wears and overworked, as Dagny says, Skip manages the state clearinghouse. And so a lot of I think some of the intent that Utah has through their Public Land Policy Coordination Office and helping kind of be a centralized clearinghouse for a lot of these federal proposals and feeding comments from local levels and state levels through a central clearinghouse back to federal agencies, that there is that mechanism in place in Nevada. And so the clearinghouse was set up through a governor executive order, I believe back maybe even the 80s, quite a while ago in the 80s. And if you go, it lists any federal proposal, NEPA proposal, request for proposals, just general press releases and things. Skip puts those on the clearinghouse. It's a central place you can go every few days and look and see if there's something that affects you. And then you as a county, a planning commission, or an individual can forward that through your local government, and they can go through that clearinghouse. And it's a way to ensure a little leverage. You get the state behind you in helping get some of that information in.
Yeah, I can do a plug if you don't mind on it.
That'd be great. Yeah.
If you haven't heard about the clearinghouse, just Google it, Nevada State Clearinghouse. It's a single point of contact for any NEPA project in the state. Anything going on that I've been notified about, which is pretty much 85% to 90% of the catch rate. It'll be on my website. Anybody who wants to be on my distro, just send me an email. I'll get you on there. I have giant global outreach distribution lists of people who stay in the loop.
And in this document, for easy resource, it talks about the clearinghouse. It has the website, it has Skip's contact information, and a little bit about it. And I just cut and pasted it I stole it from Skip anyway. So. And then I do, if there's time, a couple minutes, I wanted to talk about a couple of real positive examples that we've faced by following these steps that I talked about. One thing, basically anything that's done through a federal agency in the state of Nevada is going to have to follow NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. And so you've got the various coordination and planning processes through the Forest Service planning as well as BLM, but then you have the NEPA side as well, and that gives another way to be involved. There's cooperating agency status, but also NEPA itself and the NEPA regulations, the CEQ regulations themselves outside of FLIPMA consistency, they require consistency as well. And it says right in there that the environmental consequences section of any NEPA document shall discuss the consistency with state and local plans and policies and identify any inconsistencies and outline what the federal agencies would do to resolve those. How many have seen that section in any EISs or NEPA in this state? You know, it's mandated under the regulations.
I've got an example for you, Jake.
And I do too. So that's a kind of knowing the obligations of your partners as well as yourselves. And I have some good examples too that when we follow this process and continue to be at the table, we've got many of those inconsistencies resolved because they know that Eureka County is going to hold strong on this stuff. And then those 20%, when I talked about 80-20 that often can't, we get it documented. They're like the Mount Hope EIS is an example. There was a Barrick mining project that's an example, and there's very specific language to memorialize forever what those inconsistencies are, and an outline and a commitment of the agencies continuing to work with the county to try to resolve those as time goes on. So in my experience in the 10 years I've been here, those are the only two EISs that I'm aware of that very clearly stated it. There was a whole appendix about what would be done there. I have seen EISs that make kind of broad statements about some of the things in the proposed action may not be consistent with the county, but it sometimes doesn't really designate what each one is. So that's something you can work on too, and that's a good example. One other thing, in Washoe County, you have the Red Rock Valley case that went to the state Supreme Court in SERPA, and it was related to water rights stuff, but it has great implications on federal lands because these were pipelines to bring water across federal lands, and Washoe County has a special use permitting process in place. And so the state Supreme Court recognized that while the state engineer, Nevada state engineer, has authority over granting of water rights, and the federal agency has granting authority over rights of way and whatever, the county has sovereign authority and powers for special use permitting even if it's on federal land. And that's an opportunity if you want some control and leverage over federal land, that there are, it can't be arbitrary and capricious, right? You can't say, for one, you have to apply it equally among everybody. You can't say, well, we don't like this project because it's just some neighbor that we don't like, and so, kind of thing. You have to apply it equally. But that is an example that I point everybody to look at that case that did go all the way to the Supreme Court. And it highlights the authority counties do have on special use permitting as long as you put those baseline planning and zoning processes in place. And then the last thing on when you're including stuff in plans, we have some strong policies in we have policy portions and we have the actual management on the ground type stuff. We've kind of separated. Well, we have certain policies that related to wilderness areas. So Eureka County commissioners and many of the citizens of Eureka County, they wanted a statement in our plan that says we won't accept any additional wilderness areas or lands with wilderness characteristics. Mm-hmm. Well, the BLM has a mandate under FLTMA to identify and inventory lands with wilderness characteristics. So the BLM can say it's not consistent with our mandate under federal law because we're mandated to inventory for lands with wilderness characteristics, right? So while we do have some of those, it's just a position statement and it helps. What really helps in that agreement or that coordination with the federal agencies is having those strong policy statements, but it's better to have processes in place for what would it take for you to accept an area of critical environmental concern.
So objectives.
Right. What would it take for you, if there could be lands designated as lands with wilderness characteristics or roadless area or something like that, what are those criteria? And then you can outline those, and that gives you some room to talk. Because you might find out that, yeah, there are certain areas that, we could come to agreement on here.
Right.
And then have SMART objectives, the SMART acronym of specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time fixed, having very clear things, not just an open-ended thing, having a very specific, within 5 years we want this to happen, within 10 years we want this to happen, very specific milestones to reach towards. And then what's important for us is no matter what's in your plan, it always has the 3 pillars of the triple bottom line. That the environmental pillar, the social pillar, and then the economic pillar. Those 3 things together. And it's kind of that 3-legged stool. If you take one of those out, the stool will fall over.
Each one of them has equal value and equal importance.
Right.
And if you look at it from that standpoint, you're not going to go wrong. If you say, okay, we're willing to forego the economics, it won't stand up.
Right.
And that's where I am.
And that's where I'll close, is that that's Aldo Leopold in Sand County Almanac. He wrote that same thing. He had a couple statements I really liked. He said bread and butter, or bread and beauty grow together, meaning the bread that feeds, sustains us, and the aesthetics go together. And then he also talked about environmental problems have to have economic solutions. And I believe that that's really true, that all our plans, if you don't have those 3 pillars together, it's going to always fail. It's always going to fail. So I know I was long. I'm sorry.
All right.
My county commission calls me the filibuster. So.
My county commission calls him ad hoc staff.
Well, he just said everything I was going to say, so.
No, we'd like to hear you say it.
You have so I do have a PowerPoint more just to make sure that I say everything that I want to say to you, but I do want to thank Jake because he essentially said from his perspective most of what I was going to share from the federal perspective, so hopefully we'll complement each other. Dagny mentioned that I work for the Intermountain Region team, really value our relationships with counties, and they understand the economic importance of national forest system lands to counties. Bill Dunkelberger, the forest supervisor for the Humboldt-Toyabe, feels the same way, and he lets his district rangers know that he expects them to work with their counties and be a presence there. So if that's ever not happening, reach out first to your district ranger or area manager, but also know that I'm here to help with that. Bill's here to help with that. The Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest is the largest forest in the continental U.S. It's 6.3 million acres. And it touches 13 of 17 Nevada counties and also 9 counties in California. So just to give you an idea, we have 6 district rangers, and we have the Spring Mountains National Recreation Area down in Clark County. Jake mentioned the 2012 planning rule. We do have a new planning rule. It was our first new rule, or first revamp of the planning regulations for the Forest Service in 30 years. And it really focuses on a collaborative approach with other levels of government, state and local governments. It also focuses on an all lands approach, sort of recognizing that if we don't share our resources and coordinate better, we aren't going to be able to effectively manage. So that's the basis behind it, but it really does look at things like fuels reduction planning, invasive weeds. If we take a look that crosses jurisdictions, we're going to be more effective in resolving some of those management challenges. So it tells us that we actively have to engage with state, local, and tribal governments, including encouraging you local governments to seek cooperation. We have to, as Jake said, coordinate with related planning efforts, whatever those may be at sort of all levels of government. And we have to actually take a look at your plans and your land use policies and consider how those relate to what we're doing. This is going to be super relevant in a couple of years because the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest is very close to entering into forest plan revision. Our land management plans in Nevada date back to the mid-'80s. They actually are still separate for the Humboldt and Toyabe National Forests. So since those forests have been formally merged, we don't have a new plan. So we have a very dated plan. In about 2019, 2020, we're going to start with the first phase of relooking at those plans, which is the assessment process. That's basically starting to collect information, social information, economic information, environmental, ecological information that's going to help inform our planning effort. So that's your very first opportunity to be formally engaged in when we need to be reaching out to you to talk to you about how to do that. Then we'll go into plan development. That will take all the information gained during the assessment, consultation, coordination with partners and stakeholders, any public input. We'll use that to begin drafting the plan. That will be the formal National Environmental Policy Act process. After the plan is developed and we have a record of decision, then we start to implement, and we refer to that plan when we do projects. So it actually is really important to engage in this process because after the plan is formalized, every single project that's done on the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest, the very first thing we have to do is say, is it consistent with our forest plan? If the answer is no, we basically have three options. We can choose not to do it, we can revise it until it is consistent, or we can look at amending the forest plan, which is a little bit of a process, but it is doable. The other thing we have to do after the plan's formally revised, we have to monitor to see whether it's effective. That's another thing. Throughout this whole process, we're mandated to work in partnerships. That's, again, another opportunity to engage. How's the plan working? Do we need to look at revising it? This is a multi-year sort of ongoing process. There isn't an end to it. But I do want to let you know that this is one reason why having up-to-date effective plans for counties will be really important going forward to be able to engage with us as we enter this process. One thing I should mention too, we actually have to prepare a public participation plan which talks about how we're going to work with all our partners, and we have to publish that. So that also will be an opportunity for you to engage in terms of telling us how best to work with you and your citizens as we do forest plan revisions. So look for that as well. The benefits of engaging early, you're able to engage with us, let us know what your viewpoints are, what your plans focus on, and where your priorities are for your counties. The earlier you do that, the more opportunity there is for us to come closer together with those. It can help us have a better land management plan because we are able to work with you as partners rather than an adversarial relationship or working parallel and not matching up our resources. And speaking of resources, it allows us to maximize all of our limited staff budgets to better improve our economies and the environment. There's basically 4 ways to engage. I'm going to talk a little bit about the first 2, but I'm going to focus on the second 2 as sort of the main areas where your county plans might overlap. The first one is collaboration. And I wanted to give an example of that. That's essentially diverse partners working towards shared goals, shared values. So you look at the places where overlap, you focus on those. It's not a win-lose situation. It's where are we in a win-win situation. An example I'll give that BLM and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have been very involved with, and the Forest Service is trying to figure out how to engage with better, is the results-oriented grazing for ecosystem restoration effort. It's been mainly focused in the northeast part of the state, but it's government entities, federal government, with private landowners and other interests trying to figure out how to look at grazing flexibility so that we can achieve environmental goals and still have economic health. That's an example of a collaboration. It's long-term, it's ongoing, it requires a lot of trying to look at how can we get an improved situation for everybody. Local governments and state governments can help to lead those and actually be the ones to convene those processes. So the second is cooperation. That's essentially working in partnership. And one example I'll give at the state level is cooperation could actually be sharing resources. So for instance, say Nevada Department of Wildlife has a biologist and they can share part of their staff time to work on a Forest Service project for the land management plan revision. Those types of relationships are formalized in memorandums of understanding, but they actually involve like a partnership to accomplish a shared goal. And then the last two where the plans really come into play are coordination and cooperating agency status. So I'm going to talk about those a little bit separately. So the basis for the Forest Service direction to coordinate with counties is actually found in the National Forest Management Act and the National Environmental Policy Act, as Jake mentioned. FLPMA, that section of it does not pertain to the Forest Service. There's some language in FLPMA that pertains to our coordination with tribal governments. Everything I saw playing this out, but you know what, it really doesn't matter because the requirements for county coordination that are found in our authorities are really pretty much the same as FLPMA. So who cares where it is? We're still mandated to do basically the same thing. So we're directed to coordinate land management planning with that conducted by state and local governments. So again, that's just not us engaging you in our process, but we're directed to engage in your processes. So we'd like to have the opportunity to do that. And I wanted to emphasize what Jake said, which is please do reach out and engage us in that process as it's going on and on a continuing basis even when your plan is done. And that allows us to take into account what your plans are and hopefully also, as Jake said, lets you know what laws we're working under, what regulations or policies we're working under, and helps to bring us closer together. So it's a little bit redundant. The main things I wanted to mention here is it does take, as Jake said, ongoing communication and the understanding that we might start out with 20% we don't agree on or can't agree on due to our respective authorities. But hopefully we find ways to narrow that down. We aren't mandated to comply with other plans, so I do, this is a little bit of a sticky issue, but I do want to clarify, and I think that Jake said it actually really well. There's sometimes when our laws are going to prevent us from doing something and we have to comply with those. Our district rangers don't have an opportunity to do something different. So it's really looking at how can we get to the best situation and still comply with what we need to comply with as the Forest Service. So part of the review of other plans that directs us as far as what to look at is what are the objectives, what's the compatibility, and what are the interrelated impacts. And then we have to look at two things which match what Jake said and what I just said. Are there opportunities to contribute to joint objectives, and are there opportunities to resolve or reduce conflicts? So some examples I give there again, recreation opportunities in your community. Where can we work together on that if that's something a county is interested in promoting recreation on National Forest System lands? Fuels treatments. How can we work together there? Invasive weeds, we actually have an example going on right now where the Forest Service is doing planning in Nevada on invasive weeds treatments. NACO signed on as a cooperating agency. So again, how can we share our resources? Are there resources or knowledge that the counties have that's going to help us there? So just some examples, and there's not limited to that, but those are just a few of where we can hopefully not just identify conflicts in their resolution, but also identify opportunities. And again, nobody's authority is taken away by this process. The counties still retain their authority and jurisdiction. Forest Service still retains its authority and jurisdiction. So cooperating agency staff, this is direction under the planning rule and also the National Environmental Policy Act. It essentially says that if a state or local or federal agency has either special expertise or jurisdiction by law, and can meet the cooperating agency requirements outlined in the regulations, then we should extend cooperating agency status to them if they want it. Typically, the roles and responsibilities there are in a memorandum of understanding. It's nothing very extensive. We're currently looking at one for sage grouse. It's going to be about 2 pages long, so hopefully they're not too painful. And really the cooperating agency requirements just have to do with being able to provide information related to your area of expertise, timely review of documents, and then not releasing draft documents to the public. So the requirements aren't particularly extensive. When it comes to saying special expertise or jurisdiction by law, the way we're interpreting that includes, to my mind, your county plans. So you're an expert on your county plan and the needs of your county and how your county is looking to manage. So that's where your special expertise, your jurisdiction by law is. I have a handout for you too. Actually, I have 2. So this is just, if you're interested in taking a look at it, I would have liked to found an example where we really were off from plans of other jurisdictions. If I find one, I will share it so that you can see where we weren't consistent, what we said about it. This is from the forest plan up in Lake Tahoe, and I worked in Lake Tahoe for 10 years. So one thing I'll tell you, well, not quite that long. One thing I'll tell you about Lake Tahoe is sort of a battle to see who can be more green. So take that into account. But it does talk about how the Forest Service in Lake Tahoe, how their plan relates to, for instance, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency plan, how it relates to Lahontan Water Quality Control Board, how it relates to the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection. What's glaringly missing from this one is there is no discussion of counties, and Lake Tahoe has, I believe, 5 counties. So that's missing, but you can take a look if you want to see how they talk about it. The other handout I have, this was prepared by a federal advisory council that assisted with the 2012 planning rule. It's pretty lengthy, but there's a lot of good information. So I'll pass copies out, and it should give you a little bit more insight into our requirements to work with you and how best to do that. And it's from the perspective of stakeholders. This wasn't sort of drafted by government employees. It was from a stakeholder perspective. So some things they identified to make it easier to work with us, have the philosophy that planning is a collaborative partnership with the Forest Service. If you can, designate somebody as a point of contact when we go into forest plan revision to our planning team so that we have a single point of contact. Participate in all the meetings relative to your roles. So like for cooperating agency meetings, we'll actually have meetings to engage you and talk to you about where we are in the planning process and get your input. And then be committed throughout the forest plan implementation and monitoring. So just stay, again, like Jake said, on the county side, it's a continual process. If you can, stay with us through that process, not just of developing the plan, but implementing it and monitoring its success. And then help us connect with your citizens in your county and make sure that their voices are heard in our planning. Vincent asked me for an example. So this is a handy example from this little handout. There was a group of 4 counties and 5 conservation districts in Wyoming that actually formed a coalition of local governments in 2004 so that they could, realizing that counties sometimes often have limited resources to engage with us, they pooled their resources, they coordinated their comments on the BLM and National Forest Service land use plans, and they requested cooperating agency status for all major projects in the region. So their focus when they started out was to protect their local plans and interests, but they've actually helped to shape the economic debate in that area by introducing that as a concern and a focus. And they bring industry in as well so that we have that perspective. Essentially, they've been able to be more effective by joining together, providing a single place for the Forest Service to go to engage. And they're increasing the chances over time that the federal plans are going to change to reflect local interests. And again, it's a process. The thing I'd encourage you to do is reach out, if you haven't already, to your district ranger. Invite him or her to commission meetings if he's not going. And then as you start to engage in either creating or revising a plan, reach out to them, but also our planning officer for the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest emphasized what Jake did, which is we're not the only game in town. Of course, there's BLM, they're the 800-pound gorilla in the room compared to the Forest Service, but there's also a variety of state agencies that are going to have related planning efforts and others that you may want to engage with. So cast a broad net, reach out early, and if I can help connecting you with your Forest Service personnel, please let me know, because that's what I'm here for. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. It's nice to get out of Utah into some nice, warm, smoky weather, just like we were having in Salt Lake. It's like I never left home. As Dagny mentioned, Utah recently completed 29 county resource management plans as well as a statewide plan. And I was initially brought on in the Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office to help with that huge effort. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about how that came about, but recognizing that it's not necessarily the same in your state. You may not have the same amount of state or legislative support. But I thought it was helpful, it would be helpful just to understand why we did it and how we did it. And then I'll get into more about what those plans look like and what's in them and how they're being used now. So a couple years ago, the legislature passed House Bill 323, which amended what was required in a county's general plan to require a county to develop a resource management plan. Jake mentioned that Nevada state law already has a mechanism that invites counties to do conservation plans. Utah didn't have that. This actually required that they do it. There was no stick to get the counties to do it other than me calling and nagging them and reminding them of their deadlines. But there was a little bit of a carrot and some funding that was provided by the legislature. So what the law said was that these plans are needed to communicate and coordinate with the federal government, those terms that we keep hearing over and over again. FLPMA and NIFMA have been mentioned, and the fact that these agencies need to consider local plans when they're doing their projects. And historically, Utah, as well as most other states and counties, they haven't had any local plans other than their conservation districts or their general plans, which apply more to private lands or county lands. And so the legislature recognized that if we had these plans in place, we could communicate and coordinate better. And that the federal agencies would hopefully start taking the local efforts and local desires into consideration more than they were in the past. And so what the legislature asked the counties to put in their plan were any findings relevant that are kind of on the ground conditions concerning the resources, what their objectives are moving forward with the resources, and then some policies and guidelines about how they would meet these resources. I understand that this effort was tried in Utah in the 70s. It was seen as a socialist plot to tell the counties how to manage their lands, and it never went anywhere. So this time around, they decided, we'll give the county some guidance about what to put in their plans, but we're going to let them have the oversight of how they put it together, what policies they want in there. So as you can imagine, you have 29 counties that don't all have the same desires. They want to manage their resources differently. Some want more wilderness, some want less wilderness. Some want, they have a lot of grazing, some have no grazing. And so you can't possibly have consistency amongst counties. And Jake mentioned that the Nevada law has some sort of mechanism for resolving consistencies. I'm really interested to see that because that's something that in Utah, we're not quite sure yet how that will happen if it comes up. And it hasn't yet, but we anticipate that the more these plans get utilized and, federal projects move on and they cross jurisdictional boundaries, we're going to run into some of those conflicts. And so that's something that our office is kind of trying to struggle with. How do we resolve those? But we haven't run into any yet. We will. So I mentioned there was a little bit of a carrot to entice the counties or encourage them to do these. The Community Impact Board, which is a part of our Division of Workforce Services, they get funds from oil and gas revenues, and those funds can be used by counties for economic development projects or infrastructure projects or studies. And so those were given to our associations of governments, which is basically an entity that has 4 to 7 counties within it, and then it's kind of, I imagine, like, NACO kind of helps oversee all the county efforts, and so those funds were given to those groups, and they were to be used for data collection for that initial, what are these findings on the ground now? And so they went out, started their projects, they hired consultants, and they started gathering the existing conditions data that then all of the counties could use across the board in their plans. They all shared it. It was kind of a broad overview. It wasn't necessarily site-specific or project-specific, but here are the conditions on the ground now. All the counties shared that information. And then each county was given $50,000 to put their plan together. Many of them, most of them, hired consulting firms to do those because, like I'm sure a lot of your counties just don't have the staff or time or just resources to do that. And so there were some consulting firms that, there were 3 that worked with a lot of the different counties to put the plans together. So that was very helpful. So we covered 28 different resource topics within the plans, and this was required in the law. And I'm not quite sure how the legislature came up with some of these. They separated out mining and mineral resources and combined, historic with paleontological and stuff. Nonetheless, the counties had to address each of these resources, including the findings, objectives, and policies. How they went about doing that was up to them, as long as they touched on each of those. Also, one of them, the resources that need to be considered was economic considerations. And most of the counties looked at it on its own, just kind of a general, how do natural resources impact our county's economy? But then also within each resource area, they touched on how that specific resource has an economic impact. Not having the time or money to really dig deep into the economics of it, it was kind of a broad overview. And when we were putting together the state plan, we realized that there's really a lack of information about how federal lands and their decisions affect the economy. And talking to the state's economists, nobody had really looked at that. It's usually done on a project basis where, NEPA requires an agency to look at the socioeconomic conditions and impacts. And so that exists, but just kind of a broad, how does it all fit together, isn't really there. And so that's one thing where we found an example in Wyoming. They've gone through, and each county has a really in-depth economic analysis report. And so that's something that we're hoping to provide in the future, so that when we are coordinating with the federal agencies and they're taking a look at the socioeconomics of a project, we can say, we know there are this many jobs in the oil and gas industry in this county, and if you do this project, it's actually impacting people, like actual people. And so that's something that we're looking at in the future, is kind of expanding on that. So how did we pull it all together? First, we most of the counties kind of figured out who was going to be on their committee working on these plans. In a lot of counties, it was one person. It was the county engineer or a county commissioner. some counties just don't have, they don't have a natural resources or a land use person. And so then they hired the consultants and they worked on gathering that existing data that I talked about. And Jake had mentioned the importance of utilizing existing plans. And so a lot of that time was spent trying to find the conservation district, any planning documents that they had, any applicable county documents that were already in existence. And some of the counties, their general plans did have a section that touched on a lot of the resources, and so they pulled from those. They weren't trying to come up with new policies or objectives. They weren't trying to recreate the wheel, but they wanted to get it all in one place so that, for those coordination efforts, it's all there. And it's easy to find, and it's easy to point to, and you can see how they all tie in together. And so once this data was collected, the county started working on their objectives, which could be seen as the desired conditions, if we want to use similar terminology with the agencies. And so the counties, the objectives were kind of broad. They weren't super specific, which was fine. And then from those, they went through and developed policies and guidelines about how they would meet those objectives. And I'm not sure, so when they were gathering this data, they were using, we were helping identify, state university experts that could help provide some information. We were talking to state agency specialists, basically just trying to gather all of the free, cheap, easily available information that the counties could use kind of as a whole. So not necessarily county specific, but what can we put in here that's already in existence? How can we all share this data? Some databases were created that provided templates that counties could use. And they're linked here in the website, or in the PowerPoint, the Wasatch Front Regional Council and the Southeast Utah Association of Counties. So you can go through and they have a tab for each resource. And if you click on it, they have kind of a background of the resource, just language that can be cut and pasted into a document. They have GIS data that can be used. If some of the counties put a lot of maps in their plans, not all of them did, because that's a big chunk of time and money and resource to use. And so it was just this compilation of info that any of the counties could access and use. Which saved a lot of time and money, and a county could sit down and just pull the language and start plugging it into their document. And then when they got down to their policies, they could come up with more site-specific or county-specific policies. We also held some writing workshops where we would meet regionally with counties. If they had a consultant, the consultants would come, whoever was working on the project. And we would sit down for a day or a half a day and talk about how it was going. Were there some good writing examples that we could all use? Some counties had better writers than others. No offense to the engineers, but you're not great writers. And so the engineer working on the document, it was helpful to have, this language that he could just, or she could. And so this was really a huge part of our success in being able to pull together 29 plans, is that all the counties were working together and sharing and setting up folders that they could all access, and they would organize it by the resource type, and if someone found a report that was useful, they would tell everyone else. And so it was really, I don't think that any county could have done this on their own to the level that it was done. And in doing this, a lot of the plans, they're not necessarily consistent or the same, but they have a lot of a similar feel and a lot of the same background information, which I think is helpful when you're telling, the BLM or Forest Service, you need to look at all of these plans all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. There's some similarity there, and I think it makes it a little bit easier to swallow when they have kind of the same general tone and information contained in them, and the counties aren't necessarily just going rogue and doing their own thing. That said, some plans are about 500 pages long. I brought 2 examples, not because they're the best, but because they were the lightest and easiest to travel with. But, you know, the counties kind of, they did what they felt needed to be done for their county, and some counties have better relationships with the federal government than other counties. And, you know, one county called up and said, why are we doing this? We don't want to change anything. We love the Forest Service. We love working with them. We love our district ranger. We don't want to do it. I was like, okay, well, put down, you know, in your plan what you already have. And so Summit County, they went through and identified policies that they already have and just put them in here. And so they weren't coming up with anything new. But they now have this document that when, you know, they're not always going to have a great relationship necessarily, or a specific project will come out and they'll be like, oh, well, what did we want to do with, you know, there's that grazing allotment up there and they want to shut it down. What does our plan say? How do we talk to them about that? So they're all different, but contain some of the same information. This is probably hard to read, but I just cut and pasted an example of some of the findings that were in, this is Beaver County, Utah, for their geothermal energy. So they just went in and kind of listed what geothermal they have in existence now, providing a little bit of background about the resource in the county. The next one is from it's also Beaver, but they talk about, you know, what their objectives are moving forward. What do they want to do with geothermal energy? And so some of them are pretty broad, you know, it's like we want to protect and expand our tax base, and that was repeated in probably every single resource area. But then, you know, they also got down into some more specific policies, like, oops, I think I'm off now. Let me go forward one more. A broad policy of supporting the development of energy resources on public lands, but also more specific, number 6 there is specifically on the Beaver River, we want to look into enhancing hydroelectric energy. And so each plan has a lot of these broad either objectives and or policy statements, but then they went down into more specifics, and some of the counties work together on their data collection to do like rangeland condition reports. So they hired someone to go out and compile a report about the condition of the rangelands in their counties. And so in their grazing section, they actually have really specific policies that they want to see implemented regarding you know, like vegetation treatments. And they're more specific. In the next 5 years, we want to see a certain percentage of PJ removal, and then in the next 10 years we want it to be this. And so they went through in great detail and added some very specific policy suggestions. And again, the feds don't have to comply with these, but it makes it a lot easier when they are going to do a vegetation treatment to say, like, oh, well, what is the county? What's the county's plan say? And then it provides that opening for the discussion of, well, we weren't going to remove 10%, but, you know, maybe we could meet in the middle, or what's your justification? And they could say, well, we did this rangeland report, and it says this, which is how we came up with the number. And so that level of detail, while not in all of the plans and not necessarily for all of the resources, definitely helps open up the dialogue and provide more of the justification of why the federal plan should be consistent, or why they should try to be consistent. And so once they started getting all these together, they compiled their plans. There's a link to a couple of examples. If you went to counties, I was calling the County Resource Management Plan Light. It's really small. They kind of did the bare minimum, which was fine. We didn't have any specifications of how big or how broad it had to be. And then Kane County, Utah, theirs is one of the bigger ones, and they broke their county up into regions and went through each region and looked at the resources in each region. And so, you know, while these have some of the same information. It definitely needs to be tailored to your county's needs and what the resources on the ground are and what issues you're encountering when your federal partners are doing projects. And so once they were compiled, the counties sent them to our office. They sent the drafts to us. Our staff and attorneys reviewed them, and we sent them out to some of the state agency resource specialists to review them. We told them they could take or leave our suggestions. They, again, had the leeway to do their plans as they saw fit, but we wanted another set of eyes on them. We were looking at all of the counties, so we were getting a feel for if there were any major inconsistencies that we could try to bring up before they adopted their plans. Some of the counties listened to our suggestions and others said, no, like, you know, this is our plan, we're doing it how we want. And we definitely ran into more issues with resources where the state has oversight, like wildlife. Where when we had the, you know, our Division of Wildlife review the county plans, they were like, oh, they can't do that. That's us, you know. And the county was like, well, yeah, you know, too bad. We're keeping it in there. And so there are some of those issues where it's not just not consistent with the federal plans, but like just within the state. And so that's bringing up some interesting discussions where the wildlife board is making decisions that may not necessarily match what's in the county plan. And so we're also learning how to resolve through those. And I have to admit, when we started putting these plans together, I don't think the the state agencies realized what exactly this was going to entail. And they were like, yeah, that's great. Yeah, do those plans, you know. And then I think they realized, like, oh, wait, they're going to be adopted, and now these counties are going to expect us to actually look at them and take them into consideration. And so it's definitely been a learning curve, but it's really opened the door for a lot of coordination within the state, in addition to with our federal partners. And so once these were put together, the counties adopted them and formally incorporated them into their general plans. Dagny mentioned there's a legal process for amending a general plan or a master plan. And so they I think each county presented their draft at a planning commission meeting and provided opportunity for public input. Many of the counties also held separate public hearings where the public could come and look at draft sections and any maps or anything and provide some feedback. There wasn't a lot of public participation. I think that it's largely because the counties were, you know, they understand the needs and desires of their county. And they had a lot of input from county staff and county commission as they were putting these together. And so the only one where there was some pushback from specific environmental groups was Salt Lake County. We have the Wasatch Forest just right outside town. And there was some concern about what the county was trying to do with forest management, which they weren't actually trying to change anything, but, you know, some hackles were raised. But overall, they were well received. Many of them received good kind of press in the local newspapers. And so I think that the counties were really good about trying to incorporate the desires of the county and explain the importance of having these plans in place. And then it was mentioned that once they were formally adopted, and the counties have now had a year or so to start using these plans. And I think Kimberly and Jake both mentioned you can't just do it, stick it on a shelf, and then expect the federal agencies to suddenly take an interest in local plans and start looking into them and utilizing them. So what we've done with our state resource management plan is we mailed a hard copy to every ranger district, to every BLM field office. We set up meetings to go out and introduce it once it was formally adopted. And we let them know ahead of time that we were working on them as well. And most of our counties have regular meetings with their ranger district, their district ranger, or their BLM field office. And so, and I know a few counties sent their plans in draft form out to the BLM field offices and asked for feedback and incorporated some of the feedback. And so I think every agency in our state is well aware that these plans exist. One of our forests is going through a forest plan revision right now, and they went through I think they have 3 counties in their forest. They went through their plans. They pulled out their policies that they feel they can work into the forest plan. They went through our state plan and pulled out the policies. They've been having regular meetings with the state and the counties to make sure that they're getting the right information out of the plans and they're interpreting it the right way. And so we're really hopeful that as time goes on and we start to utilize these plans, the federal agencies will also see that we're trying to, it makes their job maybe not easier, but the forest has said, previously we try to coordinate or we try to dig up any plans we could, but it wasn't always easy to find, and we didn't really know what the priorities were for the locals. And so having these plans in place, it's kind of a one-stop shop where, it's easy to find, it's all in one place. They talk about every single resource under the sun, and it just makes it a lot simpler to coordinate. And so that's been, I think, that forest plan revision that they're working on right now has been one of the biggest ways that the county plans have been used so far. And someone mentioned earlier, it's not, you don't want to do a plan, just stick it on the shelf and forget about it. You need to use them, and you need to amend them as appropriate, and you need to change as your resource issues change. And so I know some of the counties, even though they haven't even been out for a year yet, they've already gone back and added some things, and they've realized some areas they're missing. We didn't cover utility corridors at all in the plans, and so.
Did you talk about roads?
Sort of. There's a land access section. And so, most of the counties use that to discuss RS 2477 and right-of-way and those types of things. But we're viewing them as living documents that we're going to continually improve and work on. And I'll disagree with Dwight Eisenhower a little bit. Well, the process and the coordination and the coming together to work on it and get the plan in place is important. But I think in this case, the plan and the document itself is also important because you have this tangible thing to give to the agencies to say, like, look, we have it right here. Please look at it. Please use it. So that's what we did in Utah. I think the biggest takeaway I can give is just, beg, borrow, and steal. There's no need to recreate the wheel on any of these. We have 29 county plans in place that you can look at. I'm confident that any of our counties would be happy to talk to you about their process or share their, the language they use in their plans. There's, you probably have, some of you already have plans, kind of the basis of them in place already. It's just more adding and trying to, what we tried to do is, use some of the language that's consistent with what the federal agencies use in like the NEPA process, just so it's a little bit easier to tie it all together when you're trying to look for consistency. And I'm going to give Dagny some thumb drives that have all 29 plans on them, but they're also on our website. There's a link to them on our website, the website which I can give you guys.
Well, thank you so much. Didn't I tell you guys that Utah had great information for us?
Yeah.
What an exciting process and how empowering for your counties in Utah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And to add to what Brianne just said, I just want to remind everyone that if you are or think you are going to be embarking on this process of updating or writing a new plan, borrow from Utah or look at that, but also to remind everyone what Jake said, the conservation districts are undertaking a resource needs assessment so that some of that basic data should be available for your counties. And I also want to remind everyone, in case for those on our board that know, but some of you may not know, that NACO partnered with the Cooperative Extension in UNR as well as BLM and Forest Service to begin a process of creating socioeconomic baseline analyses for each individual county. So Tom Harris and Buddy Gordon from UNR and Cooperative Extension, respectively, have begun going out into each of your counties and putting that data together. That data will then be available for each county across the state, urban and rural. So it's going to take they started a few months ago. It's going to take a couple years. They should already have Lincoln close to finished up where they started, but that resource will be out there and available too, and that socioeconomic piece is so important. It's something we found throughout this process with the Safe Grouse plans, is how important these socioeconomic impacts are from the federal agency actions, and that there isn't often a lot in the federal plan or that counties have to offer, and yet it's really where the rubber meets the road. And so that information is going to be available to be used to plug into plans or respond to comments and things like that. Just a reminder on that. So I do want to make sure I do want to give everyone a chance to ask our panelists questions, but I just want to give them a quick round of applause before we do that. And so, questions?
Are there going to be contact? I have contact on all of them, but I may be the only one. Is there contact information and do you guys mind somebody? Yeah. Okay.
Is your contact info on your PowerPoints? Mine is. Yeah. No. Do you mind if we?
Jake is on.
Because we can put that up on the website. We can make sure that on our website, I think you go to resources and educational materials, and if you go to where the workshops are cataloged on our website, we'll put the presentations and the speakers' contact info. So we can do that. I'm looking at Amanda because I'm saying we can do that.
I have a question for the panel, if you're ready.
Please, yeah.
So, sorry. When you're doing this coordination, I've never really had much success in getting the federal or often even the state personnel to come and participate in local planning efforts. And when it comes to their planning efforts, there's not a real consistent effort or a thorough effort to get the locals to participate. And yet here we are trying to do plans. What's your take on that issue?
I'll speak up first. It is a lot of work.
Yeah.
This is all, this is rhetoric. But honestly, it's a lot. I spend 98% of my time trying to coordinate with federal and state agencies and try to get them to, it's a ton of work. I wish that every county in this state, like Jerry says, I'm ad hoc staff because some of the issues for Eureka County, they're the same for many rural counties. So a lot of what we're doing, but I wish every county could have a natural resource department, because there's in the public land state and with our natural resource economies and things, I think it's so important to have somebody just dedicated to it. And when you have a county commissioner or, and you're working on a lot of other planning and zoning type things that aren't directly related to, you get an EIS and you have to review it in 30 days or 45 days. There's just so many things like that I wish every county could just see the importance of having or be able to have the capacity to do that. But it is a ton of work, and I'll tell you, like I just said, I passed my 10-year anniversary living in Eureka County and working for Eureka County, and over this 10 years, it's only been the last maybe 3 years that we're starting to see a lot of progress being made and kind of where before, when the federal agency would want to do something for a project or anything, we would get it during a comment period. Yeah. But now we're seeing more of this before it ever even goes out. We're getting a phone call, or hey, we need to come down. There's a proposal that came across our desk for a new project, or we're wanting to do a fuels management thing, or some wild horse issues, or there's some travel management issues. Where before we just waited for it to show up on their desk and comment on it. And then it was always conflict. It's always conflict. There's still conflict. And I won't say there's not in some cases, but we're seeing more now that the agencies, because we've continued to beat them over the head on this coordination thing, but it's a two-way street. Got to be actively involved. And now a lot of these things, before it even gets to, the project isn't even fleshed out. They're bringing the counties and Eureka County in on it. So.
And I just want to add something from NACO. So it was about 3 years ago that we added a dedicated position in-house at NACO. It's now called our Natural Resources Manager position. We had a great gal in that position for just under 3 years, Tori Sondheim, and she moved on. And we just hired someone actually this week to now come in and take over that position. And the purpose of that was to be able to support our counties in exactly what Jake was just describing. Relationships with the federal agencies. So use us as a resource. If you can't get anyone, oftentimes we have contacts at the state level and in the different districts around the state. But then also, if there are issues that are common to more than one county, then NACO has engaged on behalf of some of our counties on particular issues, and we've been able to support in that way as well. So definitely use us as a resource. Just call the office and ask to talk to our natural resources person, and we will always help where and when we can. And Jayla?
So I wanted to mention a couple things. One is I think it, to some degree, can be personality driven, depending on, every district ranger, just like all of us, our personalities are going to be different, where we engage is going to be different. So I think that can be part of the struggle, is there's a different comfort level there. There's also staffing issues on the federal side, just like there are on the county side. I'll pick on Santa Rosa District as an example. I think they have 2 people right now, a district ranger and one other permanent staffer. It might be 3 altogether. It's not much. So staffing has been impacted in the federal agencies, and they're sometimes overloaded with work. So I think one good thing is to sort of institutionalize those meetings like we've talked about with NACO as a whole. And Jake mentioned memorandums of understanding at the county level, sort of setting that up formally, like we meet on this kind of basis and just having it become automatic. If you're really having issues, like we said, reach out. I can help. I wanted to point out NACO as well, because Tori's position was incredible in representing your interest in being able to talk to the Forest Service at a statewide level. Dagny and Vincent are great. They are really a way of streamlining our communication and an additional source of communication. So I can't emphasize that enough. I think our relationship has been getting stronger and stronger over the last several years, and it helps the Forest Service, frankly, because it makes it easier for us to talk to you guys.
Can I?
Yeah.
So the formal agreements are so important. Like when Pete Gokachia was a county commissioner, most everybody knows Pete for Eureka County, he had the foresight to ink a master working agreement with both the Elko and BLM district in 1997. We're still working off an MOU from 20 years ago. But it establishes the formalities. So it's not, you don't send an email and say, hey, we're having a workshop or a planning thing, but it's a formality that this month, and this month of the year we're going to meet. We can meet more if we want, but we will do it here. We'll provide an agenda, 15 days ahead of time that we know we're going to talk about. When issues of conflict come up, there's a process established, and I think having something formal, getting something inked with your federal partners puts everybody on the same page of you know you're going to be doing something at least certain times of the year.
Jake, can you share that agreement, the 97?
And like Jake pointed out, I think from a Forest Service perspective, I hope we are reaching out earlier. And the reason, part of the self-interest in doing that is it makes it easier for us if we reach out before we send a project out for comment. I mean, that's really far down in the process. And I think we'd rather work with the counties up front and get something that's going to be easier, more easily implemented, not encounter a lot of resistance because nobody's heard about it to the last minute. We haven't taken into account those concerns. So I think that's what's happening. But I'm going to tell you, sometimes I'm in the Forest Service and I don't even get the, depending on the district, like Skip knows this too, like some are better than others about using the automated systems we've gone to where it goes out to a mailing list. I mean, there's not always consistency there. So I think that's not something that's the Forest Service is alone in. So just bear with us a little bit. But you get a new district ranger, reach out and try to sit and meet with them, and then formalizing that relationship. And really, then if you're having difficulties, please do contact me or contact Bill if it's really at that level where you're not getting responsiveness. And we can help get it on the radar, help streamline the communications or whatever it is.
And so I just one plug on that. So Shannon's here, so you can get her contact info. And at our August NACO Board of Directors meeting, which will be August 24th, we've invited, and he's tentatively agreed, I think he'll likely be here, the new state director for BLM. He's interim, Mike Courtney, so he'll be at that August meeting. So if there are specific issues with BLM, let your commissioners know or come to that meeting. That's an opportunity to meet him on the BLM side.
You've got my contact information. Get me, is Ed Armentis still in Bishop? Or is he gone?
He's gone.
See, and when he came on board, he got on our agenda, came to the county, and bless his heart, he had come to Bishop from the Tonto. Mm-hmm. Well, he took one look at me and says, I know you. I said, yeah, you do. But Ulrich, that used to be, we haven't had contact with Bridgeport since he was gone.
That's good for me to know. That's not supposed to be
I need
happening.
Who the new ones are, and so I know we've got new ones. Because, I mean, since Mr. Ulrich left, we don't know who to deal with out of that.
And you got a brand new one, so the timing is good, and she's going to be awesome.
Okay.
Her name's Jeanette Cutts.
Get a new one.
Okay.
Yeah, she's going to be awesome. I'll get you her contact information.
Okay. Thank you.
Did you have a follow-up?
Kimberly had something to add.
I was just going to add a little suggestion. So not only is the personal relationship incredibly important to building trust and exchange of communication between the different agencies, but when we run into really difficult situations and we're just not getting anywhere with the local staff, we elevate to regional levels. And a lot of the times going and having those conversations at the regional levels really helps to kind of trickle down that message to local staff, where you might be running into personnel that have their own personal agendas or whatever, or personality conflict issues that you might be experiencing at the local level. Sometimes just elevating that, making sure that the folks at the regional level understand what your community's needs and goals are, really can help to effectuate those changes at the local level.
Robin, we did the same exact thing you're describing, and it was a huge help. We just kept running into, banging our heads against the wall again and again and again on certain matters affecting the county. We did take it up to the state and regional level, and boy, it was amazing. And we, just like you all talked about today, we didn't go over there with, we're mad and this is what we want or whatever. We went into running into some real challenges here. I think we actually have some mutual agreement. We can't seem to get around for a few things. And it was just amazing, the relationship now we have with our local office. Because of that, working its way down through all the different departments, everything has just been great and continues to be.
It's in my packet, I handed around, but I've heard a lot of issues, folks. We have a lot of inconsistency issues with some of our state agencies. And many of you may not be aware, but there is a state act, and it's in NRS 277, and it's a State and Local Government Cooperation Act. And it's basically requiring coordination between state agencies and counties as well. So many of you may not be aware of that. It passed in 2015. It was kind of one of those that slipped through. But a recent example is the Nevada Department of Wildlife. There was a fire 3 years ago, and the BLM fenced the fire off to keep life. And the fence was supposed to come out this year based on the recovery, so the grazing could continue. NDOW went in and planted some shrubs in there, literally 2 months ago, which has now extended the grazing closure until those shrubs get established. But it was kind of one of those. So when we asked, well, do you have a plan? Yeah, there's our written. Said, but you didn't follow the State and Local Government Cooperation Act. We didn't even know about it. So it's one of those things that when they developed their plan for planting those shrubs, it was supposed to be provided to the county. It says so right in here, to allow you to say it's inconsistent with some of our grazing provisions or whatever. And then it kicks into that, solicit, consider comments, and then work towards consistency. So that conversation never even happened. This is one of the tools, again, you need to be aware of these things because you have leverage under both federal and state law, even on your state agencies.
Jake was the one that worked on that and got it into the statute. So, thank you, Jake.
For Brianne, you mentioned that you had some thumb drives available. I would love to take one.
Okay. So would
back to Lyon County.
Yeah, Middle County.
For sure. Now, we're working on our what we call our land use policy now. Both our land use policy, but also our public lands management. As a planning commission, we're the public lands management advisory. So I would love to be able to take them something to show that work can be done, and we can work together not only within the county itself, but also with the county surrounding us on the office.
And as you go through the county plans, if you see one you really like or you want to follow up with them, I'm happy to pass along the contact info for the county person, and I'm sure they'd all be willing.
And you all need to know this. I sit on the National Association of Counties Board of Directors and have for the last 10 years, and have been very, very involved in that in their public lands steering committee, energy efficiency and land use, etc. for the last 12. For the last 3 or 4, a contemporary of mine out of Arizona and I have been pushing. You must have a natural resource and public lands portion of your master plan nationwide. I look for her to be contacting some of you. She happens to be the new president of the Western Interstate Region. She's wanting to do just this kind of a workshop for all the Western Interstate Region members in Phoenix in October.
She's your sister.
Yeah, I know. Okay, it's a genetic defect. This is important, and it's important for any county in the United States that has any kind of public land, federal land conversation to have this in their master plan. So know that. Some of you guys are probably going to get tapped, and I told her after today it's on the website, which is part of the reason I want to contact information.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say it's too bad the state of Nevada couldn't give her the incentives like the state of Utah for every county to get help to get that public land use, natural resources done. I mean, thank God that we have all the counties that do have them done. They're out there. And I'm using Eureka counties for Mineral County because it was the best fit for us that we thought. But I just
they're revising theirs right now.
Let's take some of that canvas money and give it so we can get all this done.
I will say that NACO has a public land and natural resources action plan. It's a policy document that our board adopted with the priorities that then staff should work on. And one of those was working to ask for more resources and support at the state level for even the state needs. If the state itself has 1, 2 staff people that even work on 3 that even work on public lands issues on behalf of the state.
Right.
But then also to support and coordinate with counties. And so that is a goal of ours, to ask whoever the next governor is to support more support because it would have to come from the governor, would be that would be
Right.
willing to put it in the budget and all
Realize
that.
that.
But it is something that we're tasked with trying to rabble-rouse on. And I'll just add one thing. We will put on the website the link to all the 29 plans as well, so that if you don't get a stick, it'll be up there on the website. And then Brianne and then Jake.
I was just going to say, securing the funding was really the result of having a couple of state legislators who championed really hard for this effort, and they were able to convince everyone the importance of having local plans in place. I mean, you know, there are all these buzzwords about coordination and cooperation and et cetera, but being able to point out, we just got a new national monument that the counties weren't necessarily supportive of, and all these different actions. We have all these forest plan revisions coming out in the next few years in Utah, and being able to say, if we have these plans in place as they're going through these processes, they actually, will take them into consideration. It's not just us submitting comment letters and that going nowhere. And so it was definitely an education process about how you get to the cooperating part and how you get to the consistency part, and just helping other legislators and the governor understand the importance, and looking at it from, a couple of us have talked about the importance of the socioeconomic aspect, and how these federal actions and projects have an impact on the economy of our counties. And so if they have a document that spells out how a project would impact the economics of a county, and put it into real tangible terms.
And positively or negatively.
Sure.
Whatever the impact is.
Yeah, so it was definitely an education process, and as I said, Utah tried it in the 70s, and it didn't work. And it took a couple of years to get this one off the ground as well. And, trying to convince all 29 counties that it was important wasn't even easy. But I think that now that they're in place, everyone is starting to understand that it was a good idea, and it's important to have these local planning documents.
Was this worth it, you guys, today, for you to come listen to this and participate in this?
One question. One thing I wanted to add real quick.
On the website. Yeah, Jake and
Just real quick, the timing is of the essence too, because you have your kind of overarching NACO public land policy. What was it you just mentioned?
Our action.
But we have our public lands committee meet. And they put out a call for solicitation for requests. It's due here in August sometime, and bill draft requests for our legislature. So if this capacity is important for NACO and for the counties and the planning commissions and whatever, we all ought to be sending a unified message to the Public Lands Committee and some of our legislators to get some bill draft requests to talk about it. Because often you have to have it in a couple sessions before you can gain enough traction often. And if we had a bill draft in about building capacity for these plans, we might be able to get it done.
Yeah. So I will add to that at the God, is it today? The one in Battle Mountain?
It's next week.
Okay, so next Thursday is the second to last meeting of that committee, the legislature's interim public lands committee. And there are about 5 northeastern counties that are presenting at that. So take this up the chain at your county, and in Mineral County, Jerry already presented, but let your commissioners know that this is a priority, and maybe they'll put in a plug before that committee. So, and I believe it's Elko, Humboldt, Lander, Eureka are presenting, and then there's Pershing is presenting, and one more. So if you or any of those counties, ask whoever your commissioner or presenter is to put a plug in. It's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have time for one more question. Any more? Oh, sorry, Mike.
That plan that you have for all of Utah, are each of them put into their master plan the entire thing, or is it just a synopsis of that thing?
No, so they've all incorporated the entire document as a part of their master plan.
Okay, well, thanks again, everyone, so much for your attendance and for our panel. I've said it 10 times, but this will be up on our website, so share it with your colleagues and